The Soviet-Afghan War was one of the deadliest conflicts of the late Cold War era. But even beyond its immediate casualties and the instability it brought to the wider region, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan is one of the most important wars of our times, as it holds an outsized influence on world politics today. In this episode, we'll see how this war started and how the USSR lost it and was forced to retreat. We live in an ever-changing world, but one thing remains unchanged in any historical era. Knowledge and applied skills are crucial both for a single person and for humanity in general. And the sponsor of this video, Skillshare, is all about adding to your knowledge and mastering real-world skills invaluable no matter what your goals are. Skillshare is an online learning community offering thousands of inspiring classes for creative people, real working creatives, be it beginners, pros, or hobbyists. There are classes on graphic design, animation, productivity, marketing, and much more. All of them a combination of video lessons and class projects, perfect for any schedule and skill level. Skillshare classes were essential for us when we decided to start our second channel, The Cold War. Elise Navarez's class, Learn Premiere Pro and Edit a How-To Video for Beginners, gave us critical knowledge of color correction and grading. We received so many compliments from our viewers for that aspect of our videos. Meanwhile, Manolo-R's awesome Animate Your Illustrations with After Effects allowed us to add new dimensions to the Kings and Generals videos. Every human is born to create, and Skillshare is there to give you all the skills you need to create in your way. So join us and millions of others. Skillshare has a special summer offer for our subscribers. The first 1,000 of our subscribers to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Start exploring your creativity today. In the previous episode, we covered Operation Storm 333 of December 1979, during which the Soviet Special Forces eliminated the president of the newly established Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, Hafizullah Amin, in hopes that his successor, Babrak Karmal, would be able to stabilize the country. In reality, the presence of the Red Army, instead of being a stabilizing presence, triggered the creation of a deadly insurgency. The Soviet Politburo expected that the invasion would be a quick and simple affair, but they were warned by the military that it would not be the case. The leadership still decided on invasion, as Brezhnev sought to use the 1968 invasion of Czechoslovakia as a template. He wanted the troops to return by the end of January 1980, though it would become apparent quite soon that retreat was no longer an option. The USSR's intervention garnered massive international condemnation, especially from Western, Muslim and non-aligned countries, and this event would bring back the Cold War to a level not seen in many years. The UN adopted a resolution deploring the Soviet invasion, a resolution for which an overwhelming majority in the UN voted. The Soviets were also opposed by the Islamic resistance movements, collectively known as the Mujahideen. They consisted of many smaller factions, divided along tribal and ideological lines. Meeting in the Pakistani city of Peshawar in late January, 6 Sunni Mujahideen resistance groups banded together and announced the formation of a united Islamic alliance for the liberation of Afghanistan. The most notable of these groups was Bahanduin Rabbani's Jamiat-e-Islami, whose members included Ismail Khan of Herat, Nakib Alikozai and Ahmad Shah Massoud of Panjshir. The most powerful and most fundamentalist of the Mujahideen leaders, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, boycotted the meeting, not wanting his power to be disputed by the others. In the following years, millions of dollars in financial aid and weaponry flooded into Pakistan from the USA, China, Saudi Arabia, and other donors. It was there that the Mujahideen received training from the Pakistani Armed Forces and the Inter-Services Intelligence. Later on, Abdullah Yusuf Azam, the so-called father of modern jihad, and Osama bin Laden established their own funding channels and training schools. Although financial aid came from the aforementioned countries, it is reported that even more was received from the various religious organizations within the Muslim world. Azam and bin Laden were also responsible for the recruitment of the majority of foreign volunteers. Their organization, Maktab al-Khidmat, the de facto predecessor of Al-Qaeda, played a significant role during the war. Karmal felt that the situation could not be completely entrusted to the notoriously unreliable Afghan army, and demanded that the Soviet military provide aid to the DRA's army in order to stabilize the country. It was envisioned to last for only a short period of time. However, the Red Army ended up bearing the brunt of the fighting. Indeed, only several days after Operation Storm 333 on New Year's Day, they had to put down a mutiny by Afghan soldiers in Kandahar. Simultaneously, violence started breaking out in Kabul, Ghazni and Herat. On January 5th, as Soviet forces were taking control of Jalalabad, 3 battalions of the DRA deserted during the operation. Initially, the Soviet forces were mainly focused on securing the major cities, infrastructure, and civil and military installations. Therefore, they did not seek combat with the insurgents, fighting only in self-defense. It was during this initial phase of the conflict that Soviet troops engaged in looting, which drew the ire of the already uncooperative Afghan rural population. Merely a few weeks after the Kremlin hailed the entire operation as a resounding success, stiff resistance by local Afghans began hounding Soviet troops. The initial resistance was intense. However, the Soviet forces decisively defeated the Mujahideen in open battle. It was then that they realized their best chance for survival would be guerrilla warfare. For the rest of the war, the insurgents mostly engaged in sabotage missions, cutting power lines, blowing up radio stations, and attacking critical communication and supply lines. Considering the fact that going over all of these smaller offensives, raids, and ambushes would be impossible, we'll cover the most notable encounters from the war. One of the most crucial points of interest during the war was the Panjshir River Valley to the north of Kabul. The valley offered easy access to the Bagram military base, Kabul, and, more importantly, the Salang Pass in the Hindu Kush, through which most of the Soviet reinforcements and supplies passed. From the earliest moments of the war, the Salang Pass was targeted by the Mujahideen, causing significant casualties and logistical difficulties to the Soviets. Moreover, the valley was under the control of Ahmad Shah Massoud, the Lion of Panjshir, a skilled commander who turned out to be one of the most renowned guerrilla fighters of the 20th century. Realizing the strategic significance of the Panjshir Valley, the Red Army launched an operation to capture it in April 1980. 3 Soviet battalions, under the command of General Pachevoy, were chosen for the task, together with a battalion from the Afghan army. Besides these units, the 9th Company of the 345th Airborne Regiment, a unit previously involved in Operation Storm 333, had the role of securing the mountain passes at Sayat, east of Bagram. They rode in armoured BTR vehicles and were accompanied by Mi-8 transports and Mi-24 gunships. Massoud's forces did not number more than 1,000 men, and they were scattered throughout the valley. Unlike the Soviets, the Mujahideen were mostly armed with outdated rifles and whatever equipment they managed to capture in previous raids. Almost as soon as the Soviet forces had entered the valley, they came under fire from the Mujahideen. They left their exposed vehicles immediately and took cover behind some boulders. This was of little help, as they were unable to see their enemies and were being picked off one by one. In an effort to take the fight to the insurgents, they climbed the mountains, only to find nobody there. The Mujahideen did not wish to engage in a direct confrontation, so they moved further into the valley. Once at the nearby village of Ruha, Soviet forces came under fire once again. Unable to discern which houses the fire was coming from, the tanks started destroying them indiscriminately. After securing the village, they further advanced to the provincial capital of Bazarak. The insurgents suffered some casualties during this operation, but they ultimately retreated to the mountains and waited for the Soviets to leave. Before the end of the operation, a garrison of DRA soldiers was left behind in Ruha, with the goal of hindering further Mujahideen raids and providing a haven for offensives into the Panjshir Valley. However, the garrison in Ruha proved to be more of a nuisance for the Soviets than for Massoud. The Afghan army, suffering from high desertion rates, low morale, and little combat training, was besieged shortly following the departure of Soviet forces. The 2 subsequent campaigns into the Panjshir Valley had the goal of alleviating the pressure on the Afghan army. Soviet aircraft provided very little assistance, as they could not fire on an enemy that they could not see. In December of 1980, Ruha was finally abandoned, leaving Ahmad Shah Massoud in control of most of the valley. The Soviets made an unsuccessful foray into the valley in 1981. However, their fiercest offensive took place in May 1982. Before the Panjshir 5 offensive could start, the Soviets prepared with a thorough reconnaissance of the enemy. What the reconnaissance found were 95 detachments with up to 3,000 men, 100 anti-air systems, several supply points, and strong fortifications. Reconnaissance data, as a rule, never discloses more than half of the actual situation, which led the Soviet commanders to the conclusion that they were dealing with an extremely powerful foe. For this operation, the Soviets used one regiment each from the 108th and 201st Motorized Rifle Divisions and the 103rd Airborne Division, the 66th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, and subunits from the 860th and 191st Separate Motorized Rifle Regiments, and the 345th Airborne Regiment. Together with several units from the DRA's forces, the total amount of troops numbered around 12,000. The operation was envisioned to have two thrusts, the main one in the Panjshir River Valley from Bagram to Evim, and a diversionary attack along the Gorband River Valley. The Soviets also employed a disinformation campaign. They told the Afghan Army Command that the diversionary attack was the main focus of the campaign, knowing that the information would inevitably be leaked to the Mujahideen. The first phase of the offensive started on the 15th of May with the diversionary attack. This plan achieved positive results, as the Mujahideen sent a large number of troops towards Gorband. On the 16th, Soviet units captured the area around the entrance to the Panjshir Valley and placed artillery in firing positions. On the morning of the 17th, the main offensive started. Aerial and artillery bombardments were undertaken across the length of the river valley, while the main Soviet and Afghan forces began advancing. Meanwhile, a Soviet motorized rifle battalion and Afghan battalion landed near Ruha and Bazarak. A few more landings took place over the first day, bringing the total amount of troops near the two settlements to 1,200. Aerial assault units, using the element of surprise, captured landing zones, high points, and enemy strongholds. The first day's success allowed the main body of the attackers to advance along three approaches. During a confrontation with the enemy in a canyon, Soviet troops would hit the enemy with helicopter gunship fire, artillery fire, and mortar fire. After this, they would use a subunit to bypass the ridge on the heights to create a fire sack and complete the destruction of the Mujahideen. Simultaneously, they would employ remotely delivered mines on paths and mountain passes leading out of the valley to the north and south. This served to isolate the battle area from the influx of fresh reserves from the neighbouring regions around the Panjshir, and to prevent the withdrawal of remaining defeated groups into other provinces. On the 20th, Soviet forces landed at the final point of the operation, Evim. In spite of Soviet and Afghan success, the Mujahideen continued their stubborn defense by adopting a mobile defensive strategy. By the end of the battle, the Soviets had successfully removed enemy fighters from the valley, destroyed their anti-aircraft systems, and disrupted supply routes from Pakistan. From the 22nd to the 24th, the attacking forces had retreated to Bagram. Although the operation was by all means a success, the insurgents did not suffer significant casualties, thereby leaving the tenacious Massoud with his most powerful asset, his men, relatively intact. Massoud continued his insurgency, forcing the Soviets to ask for a truce in January 1983. This truce allowed him to further strengthen his position, at the cost of being berated by the other Mujahideen leaders. As the war continued, Soviet forces progressively delegated more responsibility to the Afghan army. This became especially true after Mikhail Gorbachev took power in the USSR in 1985. He saw the Afghan conflict as a bleeding wound for the Soviet Union, and, deeming Karmal a weak and unpopular ruler, replaced him with Mohammad Najibullah in 1986. With Soviet assistance, the DRA's army grew significantly. However, it was still plagued by the same issues as before. in 1987, Soviet troops started leaving Afghanistan. In November of 1987, the Soviets launched one of their last great operations in the war, Operation Magistral. The aim of this operation was to secure the road between Gardez and the besieged city of Khost. To conduct this operation, the 40th Army assembled the 108th Motorized Rifle Division, 103rd Airborne Division, 56th Separate Air Assault Brigade, 345th Airborne Regiment, and the 191st Separate Motorized Rifle Regiment. The Afghan government provided the 8th, 11th, 12th, 14th and 25th Infantry Divisions, the 15th Tank Brigade, and their Commando Regiment. The area around the road was heavily defended by the Mujahideen. General Boris Gromov ordered dummy paratroopers to be dropped near the area so as to reveal the positions of the enemy. Soviet artillery barrages and airstrikes were precise, and the Afghan commandos started advancing on the Setikandev Pass by the beginning of December. Soviet paratroopers started joining them for the assault by December 19th. Paratrooper units were flown to strategic heights to cover the armoured columns making their way up the road. One of the most important of such places was a cliff at the top of Hill 3234. The already famous 9th Company of the 345th Airborne Regiment was chosen for the capture and defence of this hill. Shortly after landing, the paratroopers came under fire from the insurgents and Pakistani commandos from two sides. In spite of being heavily outnumbered, they defended their positions stalwartly. The 9th Company was assisted by artillery strikes that were extremely risky due to the proximity of the Soviet troops to the Mujahideen. Just as they were running out of ammunition, reinforcements arrived via helicopter. The fighting continued until morning, when the insurgents ceased their attacks. The Mujahideen and Pakistanis lost over 200 men, while the paratroopers lost 6. It was through this battle that the 9th Company achieved its legendary status. The operation was a success, and Khost was relieved. As with all Soviet successes during the war, this one was also short-lived. Their inability to capitalize on hard-fought victories simply meant that a stalemate was inevitable. On the 14th of April 1988, the USSR signed the Geneva Accords, thus committing to the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan. The withdrawal began on the 15th of May, and the last of the Soviet troops left on the 15th of February 1989. The Soviet Union lost over 14,000 men to the war, mostly in the numerous raids and ambushes by the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen themselves lost more than 200,000 men, while civilian casualties were in the millions. Although not one of the main factors, it is undeniable that the Soviet-Afghan War played a substantial role in the fall of the Soviet Union. The war, together with the 1986 Chernobyl disaster, damaged the Soviet Union's reputation and its aura of strength. The conflict left an even more complicated legacy for the country where it was fought. The war did not end for Afghanistan with the departure of the Red Army, or even after the 1992 fall of the DRA. With no end in sight to the conflict to this very day, it's impossible to know the full ramifications of the conflict, but it still exerts an outsized influence on global affairs. Our series on modern warfare will continue in the near future, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more.